At 6:18 on a cold Tuesday morning, I walked down to my dock and found 43 industrial violation stickers plastered across a United States Navy patrol boat, including one slapped directly over the American flag. My hand started shaking as I scraped at the corner of that sticker, not from the old combat memories, not from fear, but from the kind of rage that feels hot enough to melt steel. Then I smelled expensive perfume drifting through the fog, heard a pair of heels clicking on the wooden dock behind me, and realized the person who did it had stayed to watch. Her name was Vivian Crowley, 61 years old, president of the Harbor Ridge Compliance Committee, owner of the biggest house on Lake Marlow, and apparently the only person in Wisconsin who believed a clipboard gave her authority over the United States Navy. She stood 10 feet away in a cream-colored coat, holding an industrial label gun like she had just won a trophy. "That ugly government boat has been lowering our property values for months," she said, smiling like she expected applause. "You military people need to understand, this is a residential community, not one of your little war zones. You military people." I had heard worse things overseas from men who were actively trying to kill me, but somehow hearing it there, beside the lake where my children learned to swim, hit differently. I looked at the flag, then at the gray hull, then back at her. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice low, "you have vandalized federal equipment." Vivian rolled her eyes. "Please, Wade, it is a boat, not the Pentagon. My name is Wade Mercer, and at the time I was a senior chief petty officer with 22 years in the Navy, most of them in explosive ordnance disposal. I had spent 3 deployments dismantling roadside bombs in places where the dust got into your teeth and every pile of trash could end your life. I came home with a damaged knee, a few scars I did not like explaining, and a nervous system that sometimes treated a dropped frying pan like incoming fire. My wife, Elena, worked nights as a respiratory therapist at St. Agnes Medical Center, and our daughters, June and Harper, were 11, identical twins with completely opposite personalities. June asked questions about everything. Harper watched everything and usually understood more than she said. We bought the lake house because water slowed my brain down. That probably sounds strange coming from someone who worked around explosives, but the rhythm of waves against old wood did something medication never quite managed. Early mornings on the dock became my reset button. Coffee in one hand, rope in the other, checking cleats, wiping down rails, listening to gulls argue over breakfast. The patrol boat was part of that routine. It was a 27-foot safe boat assigned to a joint harbor security unit operating out of Naval Station North Point, about 12 miles east of the lake. Hull number HS-317. Gray paint, official markings, sealed communications gear, emergency medical equipment, and enough government inventory tags to make an accountant emotional. I was authorized to keep it at my private dock during certain standby rotations because Lake Marlow connected to the federal channel through a controlled lock system. Everything had been reviewed, approved, inspected, stamped, copied, and then copied again because the military considers paperwork a renewable resource. Vivian knew none of that. Or maybe she did and simply did not care. She had inherited her lakefront estate from her second husband, a commercial developer who died unexpectedly and left her with money, property, and the dangerous belief that wealth was proof of wisdom. Her black Range Rover had a personalized plate reading RULES1, which told you nearly everything you needed to know before she even opened her mouth. For 7 years, she had run the Harbor Ridge Compliance Committee like a tiny dictatorship with decorative mailboxes. She fined people for kayaks left visible from the street, porch lights that were too warm, porch lights that were too cool, lawn chairs that looked inexpensive, and once, according to my neighbor Cal, a bird feeder that attracted birds she considered excessive. Most people paid her little fines because fighting her cost more energy than writing a check. That was how Vivian accumulated power, one exhausted neighbor at a time. But the patrol boat bothered her in a deeper way. She had spent the previous year quietly buying property around the southern shoreline through a company called Crowley Waterfront Partners. Her plan, though she never discussed it openly, was to turn Harbor Ridge into a luxury resort community with private dining, valet boat service, and condos priced high enough to make normal people feel like trespassers. My gray Navy boat did not fit the brochure. Neither did mechanics, nurses, firefighters, veterans, or anybody who worked for a living and occasionally parked a truck outside. Vivian wanted polished mahogany boats, white linen parties, and people who use the word summer as a verb. I represented everything she wanted removed. That morning, after I photographed every sticker, I found a laminated fine sheet tucked under the windshield wiper. Unauthorized tactical vessel, visual blight, commercial maritime activity, hazardous equipment storage, and hostile aesthetic impact. The total came to $4,300, exactly $100 per sticker, which at least showed she had done the math. I held it up and asked, "Hostile aesthetic impact. Is that an actual rule?" "It is now," she said. That was the first moment I understood Vivian was not confused. She was not an overzealous volunteer making a mistake. She was testing how far she could push me. I called my operations officer, Lieutenant Commander Mason Reed, explained the situation, and sent photographs. There was a long silence on the phone, followed by, "Senior Chief, tell me a civilian did not put adhesive on the encrypted antenna housing." "She did." Another pause. "Do not touch anything else. Document it. Base security will want a report." I should have let the Navy handle it immediately, but I made the mistake a lot of military people make when dealing with civilians. I tried to be reasonable. I did not want black SUVs arriving in the neighborhood. Did not want my daughters watching federal agents question the woman next door. Did not want to become the angry veteran Vivian was already trying to portray. So I told her I would give her one opportunity to remove the fines, pay for professional cleaning, and stare off my dock. Vivian stared at me for a few seconds, then laughed softly. "Wade, men like you are used to frightening people into obedience. That will not work here." I almost admired the confidence. She had vandalized military property before sunrise, insulted my service, threatened my home, and somehow convinced herself she was the victim. I watched her walk back toward her house through the fog, heels tapping against the dock, perfume hanging in the air after she was gone. By noon, the cleaning estimate was $18,000 because the adhesive had reacted with a protective finish around 2 sensor mounts. By 3, Vivian had emailed the entire neighborhood claiming an unstable serviceman had threatened her during an enforcement action. By 5, Elena found an anonymous note under our front door that read, "Take the war machine and your damaged husband back to the base." She read it twice, folded it carefully, and placed it on the kitchen counter between us. "Are we safe here?" she asked. That question hurt more than anything Vivian had said, because this house was supposed to be the answer to that exact fear. I looked through the window at the lake, smooth and silver under the evening sky, and felt something inside me become very still. In EOD, the most dangerous moment is not when the device is loud. It is when everything goes quiet and you finally understand how it was built. Vivian thought she had started a neighborhood argument. What she had actually done was give a bomb technician a pattern to study. And I was about to learn that those 43 stickers were only the first layer. The next morning, before Elena came home from her shift, I started building a timeline on the wall of my garage. Dates, photographs, emails, repair estimates, copies of Vivian's fine notices, an anonymous note she had slipped under our door, all arranged in neat rows beneath the fluorescent lights. June wandered in wearing mismatched socks, studied the wall for a minute, then asked if I was solving a murder. "Not yet," I told her. Harper stood behind her holding a bowl of cereal and said, "Mom says when you organize things like that, somebody is about to have a very bad week." I smiled, but the truth was, I did not know who was about to have the bad week. Because Vivian had money, connections, and years of experience exhausting people until they surrendered. I had training, patience, and the one advantage she could not understand. I did not need to win quickly. I only needed to keep her talking. 3 days after the sticker incident, the Coast Guard sent Chief Warrant Officer Nathan Cole to inspect the boat after receiving a complaint that I was storing unregistered explosives in a civilian harbor. Cole arrived at 8 in the morning with a clipboard and the expression of a man who had already read enough nonsense for one lifetime. I handed him my orders, vessel assignment records, inspection logs, equipment inventory, and authorization to use the private dock during standby rotations. He examined everything, checked the sealed storage compartments, then looked at the damaged antenna housing and shook his head. "This complaint says you have military-grade explosive materials within 50 feet of residential homes," he said. I pointed toward the emergency flare locker. "That is the closest thing on board." Coast Guard approved and counted twice a week. Cole sighed. "I believe you." Unfortunately, once somebody uses the words explosives and civilian harbor in the same sentence, we have to show up. Right on cue, Vivian marched down her lawn wearing a navy blue blazer and oversized sunglasses, carrying a binder thick enough to stop a small caliber round. "Officer," she called, "that man has been using military intimidation to prevent lawful community oversight." Cole glanced at me. I glanced at him. Neither of us said anything because sometimes silence is the only respectful response to a sentence that's stupid. Vivian stepped onto my dock without permission and opened her binder to photographs of the patrol boat taken from several angles. "These antennas could be surveillance devices," she said. "They are radios," Cole replied. "That sealed container could hold explosives. It holds life jackets. Those wires are clearly tactical. Those wires power the navigation lights." Vivian lowered her sunglasses and stared at him, as if he had betrayed civilization. "Are you refusing to investigate?" "Ma'am, I am standing on the boat investigating. What I am refusing to do is pretend normal safety equipment is a national security threat because you dislike the paint color." Vivian's mouth tightened. She was not accustomed to being dismissed, especially by a man in uniform, and I watched the humiliation settle behind her eyes like a storm cloud. She turned to me and said, "Enjoy this little performance, Wade. It will not protect you forever." Cole heard it, wrote it down, and later added the statement to his report. That became the first official document outside the Navy confirming a pattern of targeted harassment. 2 days later, he called me from his office. "Senior Chief, we received 4 nearly identical complaints about military families near Lake Marlowe. Same wording, same allegations, different names. One involved a Marine staff sergeant who was overseas when the supposed incident happened. Somebody is running a campaign." That changed everything. I started knocking on doors. First was Commander Owen Brooks, who lived on the West Shore with his husband and their teenage son. Vivian had fined them for displaying a Navy retirement flag, then reported their fishing boat as an unauthorized command vessel. Next was Staff Sergeant Luis Ortega, whose wife had received noise citations while he was deployed to Okinawa, even though their house had been empty. Then Petty Officer Kayla Monroe showed me anonymous letters calling her children base brats and warning that Harbor Ridge was not military housing. The language was polished, repetitive, and always returned to the same idea. People like us made the neighborhood less desirable. By the end of the week, 9 military households had opened their garages, kitchen drawers, and email folders to me, each one producing another piece of the same ugly puzzle. Some had moved their boats. Some had stopped displaying flags. One family had already accepted an offer on their home because the wife could not take another year of complaints. That family had received its offer through Crowley Waterfront Partners. I remember sitting in my truck outside their house after hearing that, rain ticking against the windshield, feeling the pattern lock into place. Vivian was not protecting community standards. She was softening targets for acquisition. I searched county property records, business filing, zoning applications, and meeting minutes. The deeper I went, the less Vivian looked like an eccentric HOA tyrant and the more she looked like a developer using neighborhood enforcement as a weapon. Crowley Waterfront Partners had quietly purchased 7 properties along the southern shoreline. A planning document filed under a different company name described a proposed luxury resort with private dining, concierge, marina service, and 42 waterfront units. The development required control of nearly every remaining residential parcel between my dock and the channel entrance. My house sat directly in the middle. That was why the patrol boat bothered her so much. It was visible, government-owned, and almost impossible to intimidate out of existence. Elena found me in the garage after midnight, staring at a map with colored pins. She set down 2 mugs of coffee and leaned against the workbench. "Tell me this is not what I think it is." "She wants the shoreline," I said. "We are in the way." Elena looked toward the house, where the girls were asleep upstairs. "Then this was never about the boat." "No, the boat just gave her something to attack." Elena folded her arms and stared at the evidence wall. "Wade, I love you, but I need to know something. Are you treating this like a mission because that is the safest way for you to think, or because you are starting to enjoy it?" That question stopped me. Overseas, focus had kept people alive. At home, that same focus could turn into obsession without me noticing. I told her the truth. "A little of both." She nodded. "Then promise me you will not become the person she is telling everyone you are." I promised. The next escalation came at 5:40 on a Thursday morning. Vivian parked her Range Rover sideways across the launch ramp, completely blocking the patrol boat from reaching the water. She stood beside it in white pants, designer rain boots, and a plastic poncho, holding a folder labeled Harbor Safety Emergency Order. I had received a call 15 minutes earlier directing me to assist with a disabled fuel barge near the channel lock, so I did not have time for theater. Move the vehicle, Vivian. This launch has been suspended pending environmental review, she said. By whom? The Harbor Ridge Waterfront Safety Council. I had never heard of that council because Vivian had created it the night before with herself as chair and 2 neighbors listed as members. I called base security while she explained that federal orders did not supersede private community authority. Petty Officer Jonah Price arrived 10 minutes later and politely informed her that blocking emergency maritime access could result in towing and criminal charges. Vivian lifted her phone and began recording. "Look at this," she said to the camera. "Armed military personnel surrounding an unarmed woman on private property." Jonah looked down at his empty hands. "Dan, at me. Senior Chief. Am I armed and nobody told me?" I almost laughed, which was exactly what Vivian wanted. Any reaction she could edit into aggression. The marina manager finally threatened to tow her Range Rover, and she moved it while shouting that the Navy had occupied Harbor Ridge. That evening, a video appeared on the neighborhood message board titled "Military Intimidation at Our Community Dock." Vivian had removed the first 8 minutes and posted only the moment Jonah warned her about criminal charges. The comments turned ugly fast, until Commander Brooks uploaded his own full recording from across the marina. The complete video showed Vivian blocking the ramp, refusing repeated requests to move, and declaring that HOA authority outranked federal orders. By midnight, even people who disliked the boat were asking whether she had lost her mind. Frustrated people make mistakes, and Vivian was becoming frustrated. 2 nights later, my new motion cameras caught a figure in camouflage climbing over the side gate at 3:12 in the morning. The person moved toward the patrol boat carrying a bucket, a stack of papers, and what looked like a professional adhesive applicator. The camera angle did not capture the face, but the expensive leather shoes beneath the camouflage pants were unmistakable. At sunrise, I found 6 fake condemnation notices bonded to the hull with industrial epoxy. The papers displayed a federal seal, cited an agency that did not exist, and ordered the immediate removal of the vessel as a biological and explosive hazard. One notice had been glued across a maintenance access panel. Another over an official Navy identification plate. The repair specialist estimated $24,000 in damage. This time I did not call Vivian. I called base security, Coast Guard investigator Cole, and Lieutenant Commander Reed. By noon, the dock was sealed as a federal evidence scene. By 3, a special agent named Rachel Kim was sitting at our kitchen table, reading every complaint, every fake notice, and every anonymous letter while Elena poured coffee. Agent Kim was quiet for nearly 20 minutes, then tapped the photograph of the forged federal seal. "Whoever created this did not just vandalize a boat," she said. "They impersonated federal authority to interfere with military property. That is a very different kind of problem." I asked whether she believed Vivian was responsible. Kim looked toward the window, where Vivian stood on a balcony with binoculars pressed to her face, watching federal agents move around my dock. "I believe," she said, "that your neighbor has confused being influential with being untouchable." Then my phone buzzed with an email from the marina office confirming a special patrol assignment I had never discussed outside official channels. Before I could speak, I saw Vivian lower her binoculars, pick up her phone, and smile. That was the moment I realized she was not only watching me. Somebody was feeding her my schedule from the inside. And if she knew when I would be gone, the next attack would not be aimed at a boat. I did not sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with Agent Kim, Lieutenant Commander Reed, and Elena while the coffee went cold between us, staring at that unauthorized patrol notice on my phone. The assignment was real enough to look convincing, but it had been inserted only 20 minutes earlier by Reed through a controlled internal channel, a test designed to flush out whoever was leaking my schedule. Vivian had reacted almost immediately. Agent Kim leaned back in her chair and said, "Someone between the base and this marina is selling her information." Elena looked at me, then toward the staircase where the girls were sleeping. "So what happens when Wade is actually gone?" Nobody answered right away, and that silence told me everything. By morning, the Navy had replaced my regular rotation with a sealed schedule. Base security had opened an internal investigation, and Agent Kim had obtained permission to monitor communications connected to Vivian's complaints. I submitted one more false assignment stating that I would be gone the following Friday night on an extended patrol through the federal channel. Then I parked my truck inside Commander Brooks's detached garage across the lake, borrowed a dark jacket, and watched my own house through a long camera lens like some exhausted suburban spy who had forgotten whether he was defending the country or trying to catch a rich woman with a glue habit. At 11:37, a golf cart rolled quietly behind the marina office. The driver was Nolan Pierce, the assistant harbor manager, a man who had shaken my hand dozens of times and called me chief whenever he wanted help fixing something. Vivian stepped out of the shadows and handed him an envelope. He handed her a printed copy of my fake assignment. Agent Kim's team photographed the exchange from two directions. When investigators confronted Nolan the next morning, it lasted less than 10 minutes. Vivian had been paying him $600 a week for access to duty notices, visitor logs, and emergency call-outs. She told him she was protecting the neighborhood from dangerous military activity. He told himself it was harmless because the schedules were routine. People can talk themselves into almost anything when cash arrives in an envelope. Nolan agreed to cooperate, and what he gave us was bigger than the leak. Email showed Vivian discussing property purchases, nuisance complaints, and what she called relocation pressure. One message to a business partner read, "Once the service families are gone, the shoreline becomes marketable." Another listed our home as Parcel 11 and described me as the primary obstacle to unified waterfront control. I read that sentence 3 times. Not Wade Mercer, not Elena, not June and Harbor, just an obstacle attached to a parcel number. That was Vivian's real talent. She could remove the humanity from anyone standing between her and money. Agent Kim brought the evidence to federal prosecutors, but they wanted one clean act tying Vivian directly to attempted entry and damage. Vivian, as if determined to help, announced a public meeting called Reclaiming Harbor Ridge from Military Encroachment. She invited local reporters, county officials, and every homeowner within 5 miles. According to Nolan, she planned to enter the patrol boat the night before, photograph sealed equipment compartments, then present ordinary communications gear as proof I was running a secret weapons operation. Her nephew, Chase Crowley, would help her open anything locked. Chase was 28, permanently broke, and had the nervous energy of a man who considered bad decisions a form of employment. We did not set a booby trap. That part mattered to Elena, to the Navy, and especially to the lawyers. Base security installed an approved non-toxic marking system around the restricted access points, the same kind used during controlled training exercises, while federal agents positioned cameras and officers nearby. Nothing would injure anyone. It would simply identify whoever crossed into the secured area without authorization. At 2:48 on Friday morning, Vivian arrived wearing black clothing, gardening gloves, and shoes that probably cost more than my first car. Chase followed with a pry bar, bolt cutters, and a small camera mounted on his chest. I watched from the darkened second floor of Commander Brooks's boathouse while their voices came through the surveillance feed. "Get inside," Vivian whispered. "Photograph everything. And by breakfast he is finished." Chase asked what would happen if the equipment was legal. Vivian stopped walking and looked at him like he had asked whether gravity was optional. "It does not matter what it is. It matters what people believe it is." That sentence ended her. At 3:16, she stepped over the warning chain and onto the secured stern platform. The marking system released a burst of bright blue training dye across her coat, hair, and face. Vivian screamed so loudly a flock of geese lifted off the lake at once. Chase jumped backward, dropped the bolt cutters, then stumbled into the second marked zone and received the same blue cloud across his chest and arms. For a few seconds, it just stood there glowing beneath the dock lights, looking like 2 furious mascots from the world's least successful insurance company. Then the patrol boats came in. Blue lights swept across the water, engines growled through the fog, and federal agents moved down both sides of the dock. Vivian tried to run, slipped on one heel, caught herself against the railing, and shouted that she had been chemically attacked. Agent Kim stepped forward holding a warrant folder and said, "Ms. Dace Crowley, you crossed a secured barrier carrying tools intended to force entry into federal property. The substance is non-toxic identification dye." Vivian pointed at my house. "He planned this." "Yes," Agent Kim said with us. That was the first time I saw Vivian genuinely afraid. Not angry, not offended, not performing for an audience. Just afraid. Chase started talking before the handcuffs were fully closed. He said Vivian had paid him to damage the radio housing, plant fake evidence, and leave a fuel container in the storage compartment so she could accuse me of unsafe handling. He gave investigators access to messages, payment records, and a draft presentation titled The Militarization of Lake Marlow. By sunrise, the same reporters Vivian had invited to watch my public humiliation were filming her being escorted from the marina, covered in blue dye, while officers carried away bolt cutters, forged documents, and bags of fake evidence. I stood at the end of the dock in uniform, not smiling, because the strangest thing about finally winning was how tired I felt. Elena came beside me and slipped her hand into mine. "Is it over?" she asked. I looked at Vivian's empty mansion across the water, its upstairs curtains moving behind the glass, and said, "The loud part is. The quiet part took months." Vivian faced charges for damaging federal property, false statements, bribery, conspiracy, stalking, forgery, and fraud connected to her development company. No one received probation after cooperating. Chase entered treatment and testified. Crowley Waterfront Partners collapsed when lenders discovered the environmental violations, fabricated community petitions, an illegal pressure campaign behind its land acquisitions. Several families who had been pushed into selling received settlements. Vivian eventually accepted a plea agreement that sent her to federal prison for just under 2 years and required her to pay restitution large enough to force the sale of her estate. Some neighbors said the sentence was too harsh for an older woman who had simply become obsessed with community standards. Others said she had spent years using wealth, fear, and government systems as weapons, and getting caught did not transform her into a victim. As for us, we stayed. The patrol boat was repaired. The fake fines disappeared, and Harbor Ridge replaced its compliance committee with a board that required recorded votes and independent review. Elena planted lavender along the walkway where Vivian used to stand watching us. June called it the Victory Garden. Harper said Victory Gardens usually had vegetables, but June told her emotional vegetables still counted. One evening, months later, I sat on the dock with my daughters while the sun turned the lake copper and the repaired flag snapped softly above the stern. Harper asked whether Vivian hated the military. I thought about it before answering. I do not think she hated uniforms, I said. I think she hated anything she could not own, control, or push aside. June looked at the boat and said, "So she picked the wrong family." Maybe she did, but that is the question I still wrestle with. Because if I had not been military, if I had not known how to document every detail, if federal property had not been involved, would anyone have stopped her before another family gave up and left? Tell me what you think. Was Vivian's punishment fair? Or did the system go too far once federal agents became involved? And if an HOA used harassment to force families out for profit, would you stay and fight? Or protect your peace and walk away? Share your answer in the comments, because sometimes justice begins when ordinary people stop suffering quietly and start comparing notes.